Welcome back to Epic Exchanges. I am Kelly Snider, and as you know by now, I believe that everyone has a story that can be incredibly inspiring and impactful to at least one other person, often thousands. And so it's super important for us to find our stories, discover the gift or the lesson that we got from those experiences, and then share them so that we can inspire and empower others. So we're back today with another guest that has a great story to share with us. Welcome, Pete. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Kelly. I'm Pete Partin. Live in Indiana. Worked in IT most of my life. But I am also a motivational speaker, author, and an artist. And I'm passionate about being an inspiration for others and sharing my stories. So thank you so much for having me on your podcast.
Well, I am really looking forward to listening to the story you're going to share because I know it, as we've talked a little bit beforehand, that it relates to my life. So I want you to share your story and then we can talk about it. So jump on in.
Sure. So, June 20th, 2023 started like any other day. I went to work as I'd done for many, many years. And I got to work and I had go to walk in and I stopped to talk to a colleague, was having a conversation, and halfway through a sentence, I could not talk anymore. It was in my brain, but it was not coming out of my mouth. And frankly, I didn't know what was going on. Um, so eventually I just kind of gave up and I went to my seat. I was there about 5 minutes and a coworker was there, turned around, and looked at me and said, "Are you all right?" Because I dropped my mouse a couple times. And I just said no, shook my head no, and he went and got the manager. And so they called an ambulance for me. Turns out I was having a stroke at the time. I didn't realize that. My right arm had gone completely numb, and I was starting to slur my speech. So I had been in healthcare previously, so I understood the symptoms and I kind of understood that might be what's going on. So they transported me to the hospital ambulance. And fortunately, this happened to be a specialist there that day that specialized in the type of surgery that I needed. And what ended up happening is I had a blood clot in my brain, in the area of language. Um, and it just stopped me from being able to talk altogether. So what they had to do is the specialist had to go in through my leg, up through my heart into my brain, and basically suck the clot out of my brain. I was obviously under for the surgery. I was out for a day and a half. And when I woke up, I didn't know where I was at first, but they came and the first question they asked me is, "Do you know who you are? Do you know your name?" Uh, I did, fortunately, but I couldn't enunciate it at all at that time. So they asked me to say my name. And I just kind of grunted. That's all I could get out. Um, and for me, this was devastating because I was well on the path to becoming a motivational speaker to talk about other periods of my life. And so to lose my voice and to lose my ability to speak, it was just, a devastating blow. And I didn't really know what was going on at the time. They told me you'd had a stroke and everything. They brought in a speech therapist to work with me. It was slow going, definitely in the hospital. So ended up being in the hospital for 6 days. When they released me, and fortunately, I should back up, speech was the only area that was affected. So I didn't have any loss of mobility. I was really fortunate that they got me to the hospital within an hour and a half, which minimized the damage of the stroke, strictly to language. Um, so I was in there 6 days, and when it was released, they told me, well, you'll have to go through outpatient speech therapy. And just being realistic, it's probably going to take a year or two for you to get your voice back and to be able to talk again normally. which I'm stubborn, I guess. I wasn't willing to accept that. It didn't work for me, but they gave me exercises to work on. So I left the hospital, went home, worked every day on those exercises because I wanted to talk again. And so they had said a year or two. The closest appointment for outpatient speech therapy was 6 weeks out. So by the time I got to speech therapy, they tested me and uh, funny story really quick. One of the questions was they had a picture of a house and they say, can you tell us, what this is? And they were probably wouldn't expect me to say it's a house, really something really simple. And it said, it's a house. I think it's a Tudor or a colonial. So they tested me basically, and I laughed. And um, basically, they said at this point, there's really not a whole lot we can do for you that you haven't already done for yourself. So instead of the 1 to 2 years that they told me it was going to take, in 6 weeks, I already had the basics of speech back. Um, so I continued to work on that, continued to improve. And so I had my stroke June 20th, 2023. I went back to work actually August 31st, so pretty quickly after having a stroke. Um, but honestly, I think that was a little too soon. I don't know that I was fully healed. Something else that I found was affected was my higher math skills. I mentioned I've been in IT, so obviously that's another devastating blow to not have, full function of my math skills because in the position I was in, that was really kind of necessary. So, I went back to work, worked really hard at it. But I was there for just over a month, and I was basically let go, um, and told, you can't meet our productivity expectations. And so, they terminated me, and I have been out of work for basically a year now, trying to, get back into my career. So, it's been a challenging time. I've had to do a lot of soul searching in the meantime. Fortunately, because I had some wonderful people in my life, some wonderful examples. Specifically, my grandfather was the most wonderful person in my life. He was my rock. They gave me my faith, and faith was really important for me, and I drew on that a lot as was recovering, and over the past year, because when you're out of work for a year, you start to question your value and your worth, and say, am I ever going to get back into work? Am I ever going to do anything worthwhile again? Um, but because of my faith, I didn't go through that. Um, and it's hard to explain, but before my stroke, I was a classic overthinker. I like to run what if scenarios, and I would come up with, every conceivable thing that could go wrong, regardless of the situation. Something my stroke did, which makes me consider my stroke a blessing, actually, it got rid of the overthinking. I don't do it anymore. Um, and I just have this peace that I've had since I, had my stroke and I got my voice back. I'm not worried. I mean, it's like there's something inside. I know everything is going to be okay, regardless of what's happening around me. I know that in the end, everything is going to be okay. And I talk about, the storms of life. We all have storms in life, and some of them are brutal storms. I think about the poor hurricane victims in North Carolina and Florida now and what they're going through and how terrible that is. And there's just a sense of hopelessness with that. Um, But you just gotta, yeah, hang in there. You gotta be resilient. You gotta persevere, and just understand that no matter how dark the storms get in life, the sun will come out again, and things will be okay. You'll be okay. You just gotta believe in there, or hang in there and believe in that, and in the end, everything will be just fine.
Well, wow. Thank you for sharing. I can't believe this stroke was just over a year ago because, as you said, they originally said it could take 1 to 2 years for you to get your
Yes.
speech, your voice back. And hello, it's not been 2 years. It's been just over a year.
Right.
Sounds like you probably had a lot of it back within a couple months.
Yes. Yes.
Definitely a testament to perseverance and determination there.
And
One,
it was interesting if I could add to that. So what I had to do, since the area of my brain that did language was damaged, is I had to reroute and use a different part of my brain to speak again. And so it was learning to do that. And so yeah, that was challenging. But I found that first, that whenever I get really stressed out, and I got stressed out a lot at work. I mean, it was pretty toxic workplace that I worked at, and even sometimes even they would push me to get me stressed out because when I was stressed out, my brain would try to go back to that damaged area and speak from there, but I couldn't, and so I would start stuttering and not be able to talk at all. Um, and so, I had to overcome that in the past year too. And fortunately, I'm okay with that now. But yeah, it's been definitely interesting experience.
right. There's so much I kind of want to go back to, but one thing that struck me is because this is something that I have done for years is the what if scenarios and overthinking and all of that. I've definitely been there. But I bet that, as you were overthinking and thinking of all the things that could go wrong, that stroke was never on that roulette wheel of something that might happen. Um,
Not at all.
can I ask how old you were when you had the stroke?
I was 52.
Okay, so yeah, we traditionally, as I grew up, I would hear of stroke happening. My grandmother had a stroke at 80, and the more elderly, and you kind of expect it, and it doesn't seem as big of a deal. I mean, even though it is, but when you hear
Right.
someone younger in the workplace or anywhere in their lives in the home having a stroke, it brings it home as like this can happen to anyone at any time. And
Definitely.
as I shared with you before we started recording, my sister-in-law had a stroke at the age of 38. I didn't tell you how old she was. So with 2 young kids, but
Wow.
that it struck our whole circle because she was so young and because it was such a complete stroke that she was locked in and still is several almost 20 years later. But and she got help really quickly too. So it just shows how these blood clots and how the damage can attack different areas of the brain, which I find so fascinating, how our
Yes.
brains work and how we can relearn things when there
Right.
is a very localized area of damage, how our neural pathways can work. And I don't even know how that works, so we won't get into that. But
Sure.
I would love to know. There's a couple of things I want to know. But first, have you kind of dived into, excuse me, I'm going to cough. I'm going to edit that out of the audio version. And I like to say that the YouTube version, for those of you watching on YouTube, is unedited, so you can see life happens to us all. But what I'd like to know is, did that all of that as you were learning to speak again, and you obviously have lots of intelligence to understand what's going on and understand all of these different things. Did you kind of dive into how the brain works, or did you learn new things?
Um, to be honest, no, I didn't do any research. I mean, beyond the basics of what happened to me, um, knowing that it's like a blood clot in the brain and knowing basically what caused the blood clot. I mean, I did delve into that. Fortunately, when I went to, I had an electrocardiologist. I didn't know that was a thing. I knew cardiology, but electrocardiology. He explained, did a thorough job of explaining to me what happened. And it was actually a case of atrial fibrillation in my heart. So which is basically uh, through the aorta and the blood clot up into my brain. And the aorta is the closest blood vessel to the brain. So it was very quick when it happened. Um, but yeah,
Is
that's what happened.
is there any fear of it happening again? Like, is it a heart issue that could make it
Yeah,
happen again?
thank you. There's always a possibility. However, I'm on a blood thinner now, and I have to be on it for the rest of my life. And that it reduces the risk to, I think, less than 10% now with the blood thinner that I'm on of it happening again.
Right.
So
Um,
there's been some lifestyle adjustments as well.
oh, definitely. Now you mentioned the speech therapists and the medical system that was there to support you. I'd love to know about what other supports you have in your life. I mean, obviously the workplace wasn't super supportive once you got back to work.
Right.
But,
Yes.
but friends, family, did you join any support groups of people that had had stroke or anything to just kind of surround yourself with that positivity and encouragement?
I mean, obviously, I have my immediate family. I've got my wife and kids. They were super supportive. I have friends that I used to work with at a previous job that checked on me quite frequently. Um, but outside of that, I really didn't. Um, and I draw upon, people in my past. I call them my waypoints. My grandfather was one, but I've had a lot. I've been blessed to have some pretty wonderful people and mentors in my life, and they've just instilled, this belief in myself. Because they believed in me, and therefore I ended up believing in myself. Eventually, it took some time to get there. Um, but yeah, so they had they were very positive. So positive role models for me, just always encouraging and inspirational. Fortunately, all of them have passed away. And actually, I halfway think this was part of the factor because what my closest friend and mentor passed away that previous December. So December 2022, he passed away. And we've been friends for years. I actually did a podcast at one point called Unscripted with him. Um, and then a month later, I lost my mother as well. Um, so just a very, very stressful time, and then everything going on at work. So unfortunately, outside of my immediate family, I really didn't have as much of a support system in place.
Right. Have you developed a new community of support through your speaking, through your podcast guesting, any of that?
Yeah, absolutely. I belong to several Facebook groups, and I do have other mentors as well. I had a motivational speaker that I listened to back in 2015 when I was a manager for a healthcare system. We were looking for somebody, and I scoured YouTube and found him on there, and invited him to come in, and he spoke at what we call a Leadership Development Institute. And we just became friends after that. He's actually featured me in a couple of his books. Let me contribute a chapter to a couple of his books. Um, yeah, I guess he's been there. I shouldn't say I had nobody. He's been there and been encouraging the whole time, as well as there's a couple other people as well that I have found. So
Right.
I guess no one was not a great representation. I've had a few people.
Well, one of the things that struck me in your story was how when you went back to work, that ultimately they said you couldn't fulfill the job duties and let you go. but you also said how toxic it was, and obviously not a supportive
Yes.
environment. So what kept coming to mind is a quote I go back to regularly, and it's what helped shift some of my thinking. Is Tony Robbins says that when you can take your worst day and find something good in it, and you realize that life isn't happening to you, it's happening for you, then you turn that worst day into the best day, and life is a gift. And you find grace and gratitude. And I totally butchered that quote, but that's the
No,
meat of it.
that's fine. And my friend Sam Glenn, who's the motivational speaker I was referring to, he is big on that too. Just finding gratitude every day. If nothing else, you woke up, you're breathing, you can stand up
Yeah.
and, just find something in every day. And really, that's kind of what's carried me through, is being able to do that and just be thankful. Because yes, it was a very toxic workplace. I was not happy there, had not been happy there for years. So, even though I've been out of work for almost a year, I've been at peace. I'm happy because I'm not having to go into that toxic environment every day.
Right.
And also, I guess as a silver lining, it's allowed me to hone in, and telling my story and doing something that really makes a difference to me, and inspiring others is really important to me and has been, for a long time. So the fact that I can focus on doing that now and work on my book and work on motivational speaking. It's just fantastic. So, I could have been down and out, and honestly, at any other point in my life, I probably would be freaking out now, being unemployed for almost a year. And I said, I'm not, because I know in my soul that everything is going to be okay in the end.
Right. Now, for those of you watching on YouTube, I just want to talk about the proverbial elephant in the room here, because behind you, you are in your art studio, as you shared with me, and behind you is all your artwork. It's beautiful from what I can see of
Thank
it
you.
here on the screen. So how does that art and creativity fit into how you're living your life now, and even maybe some of your recovery?
Yeah, thank you. So I actually got into art. Believe it or not, I didn't do art most of my life. I was afraid to. I was afraid of not being good at it. So I started in 2020, actually, with art. It's completely self-taught. I purposely didn't take classes. I wanted to learn on my own. I wanted to make my own mistakes, and learn from them. I started with acrylic paintings, so specifically landscapes, sunsets, beach scenes. Those are my favorite to do when I'm doing acrylic paintings. But in the process, along the way, I discovered liquid art or pour painting, as I call it. And I just fell in love with it. It's a lot of what you see behind me is the pour painting. I love it because I can do it quickly. Um, and I had to leave it set to dry for 2 or 3 days. And when I come back, it is shifted. So it's always different, everything completely unique. Um, but I have found a peace in art, whether it's the acrylic painting or pour painting, just being able to give myself over to it. Because I'll be honest, the first painting I did, I think was atrocious. I've had other people say, "Oh, it's beautiful." Well, art truly is, and the beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Um, and it's important to learn that too. Um, and I'm always highly self-critical as well. So of course I think, well, that's no good. But other people say, well, that's really great. But I didn't give up. I took that initial painting, put it in the closet for about 3 days and said, I'm not doing this again. I tried it. I suck at it. I'm not going to do it anymore. But something nagged at me and something made me come back to it. And I did another painting. And the first one was a flower. So I did another flower. It was better. So I kept practicing, kept at it. And with each one, it got progressively better and better and better. Uh, but it brings me such peace when I'm doing it. The process of creation, whether it's art, I'm also a writer, so writing is the same way. When I am creating from up here and here, it just gives that sense of peace and purpose, really. So it's been a wonderful addition to my life. I actually formed a business called Positively Pete. Um, that positivitypete.com is my website. Um, that I do my art. I tie that in my writing and my motivational speaking all together, kind of in one thing. So it's Positively Pete Art and Inspiration.
Well, I feel like your story about your art and learning to do art and obviously what's behind you, but also the story you shared about your stroke and learning to speak again and even right now of being out of work for a year, almost a year, and still moving forward is such a testament to perseverance and dedication. And that's what I'm taking from our conversation. But I would love to know if our listeners could take one thing from our conversation or one tip or one thing you want them to remember, what would that be?
Um, Number one, life is going to throw storms at you. Um, and some of them will be pretty dark. Just hang in there and trust that everything's going to be okay in the end. But I want to tell you a short story from my mentor, Rick, that I was talking about that passed away in December 2022. At one point, he was my director at work. I gave me my first leadership position, actually, because he saw something in me, believed in me. Something he always told me is it's okay to fail. Failure is actually part of success. But if you're going to fail, fail forward. Learn from your mistakes and do your best to not repeat them again and try to improve on that next time. But the really important thing is don't give up. You gotta hang in there and just don't give up.
Right. I love that suggestion of failure isn't the end. Failure is an opportunity. And yes, fail forward. So that's perfect. Why is it important for you to share your story? All of your stories, because I know we didn't touch on all of them, but
Right. Yeah, there's a lot more to my life. Um, I have this light inside of me, and it's important to, be an inspiration for others and provide hope to others, to let them know. I think back to my childhood, which I won't go into the details, but I had the abuse when I was a child, but I also was blessed to have my grandfather there, and I just used to love it. When I was a little boy, he would take me on his knee. He would give me a hug, regardless of the situation. And sometimes it was a really bad situation. He looked me in the eyes and says, you know what? I believe in you. Trust me. Everything is going to be okay. And that meant the absolute world to me. So it's my mission to reach out to others, let them know, A, it's going to be okay, but B, they're not alone. You know, that's why it's important to share the story so that other people know, yeah, I've been through a lot in my life, but I've come out okay. I'm so thankful. It goes back to that gratitude that we talked about, finding something in every day.
yeah. And really, you're just echoing my purpose is helping people put their stories out there so that others who are going through the hard times know that they're not alone, that someone else like you has made it through and is still here, still positive, and has found maybe a new passion, a new direction that is again passing that on. And I really believe we need more people in our world today that are like that are wanting to be positive, to inspire, to help people see that there is a light, always a light and a way through the storms. So thank you for being that. Now, you mentioned your website, but how else can people find you if they want to follow and be inspired by you And maybe even, I don't know, you haven't said if you sell your art, but maybe they want to buy your art.
I do, and actually I have some of them out on positivelypete.com. I also have a Facebook site, Positively Pete, on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. Actually, I'm on TikTok as well. It's positively underscore Pete. But I've released a lot of videos on TikTok. If someone wants to go hear more of my story, I've shared a lot of it out there, uh, and a lot of what I've taken away from those experiences as well. So I would encourage people to go, look at my TikTok.
Awesome. Well, we will share all the links on our social media and in our show notes so that people can find them easily. Thank you, Pete, for sharing your story with us, with me, and for being willing to pass that light on. As I said, we need more people like you in this world that are wanting to be the light, because there's a lot of pain right now.
Yes. And I think back to my grandfather, and he was such an inspiration. He literally would give his shirt off his back to a complete stranger. That's just the type of person he was. And I've said my whole life, if I could be half the man he is, then I will have lived a pretty good life. So, yeah, it's important for me to share my light like he did with me. So, thank you
Well,
so much for having me.